We'll intervene whenever we decide it's in our national security interest to intervene. And if you don't like it, lump it.
The problem with America is not that we go around marauding around the world imposing ourselves. The problem with America in the last 10, 15 years, since the end of the Cold War, really in the last 60 years, is that we've been too slow to get involved.
I don't know how many Iraqi civilians were killed, but I can assure you that the number is the absolute minimal that it's possible in modern warfare.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
You know, that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
Welcome to the Darkened Hour.
Welcome to another episode of The Darkened Hour, and I'm your host, Adam Fitzgerald. With me today is a very special guest. John Kiriakou is a former CIA case officer, former senior investigator for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and former counterterrorism consultant for ABC News. He was responsible for the capture in Pakistan in 2002 of Abu Zubaydah, then believed to be the third-ranking official in al-Qaeda. In 2007, Kiriakou blew the whistle on CIA's torture program, telling ABC News that the CIA tortured prisoners, that torture was official U.S. government policy, that the policy had been approved by then President George W. Bush. He became the sixth whistleblower indicted by the Obama administration under the Espionage Act. In 2012, Kiriakou was honored with the Joe A. Callaway Award for Civic Courage, an award given to individuals who advance truth and justice despite the personal risk it creates. He was later named Peacemaker of the Year by the Peace and Justice Center of Sonoma County, California. He won the Penn Center's USA's prestigious First Amendment Award in 2015 and is the author of The Reluctant Spy, My Secret Life in the CIA's War on Terror, while also authoring other books such as The Convenient Terrorist, Surveillance and Surveillance Detection, A CIA's Insider Guide, and Doing Time Like a Spy, How the CIA Taught Me How to Survive and Thrive in Prison. John Kiriakou, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to do it.
You know, you mentioned in your book that you were actually recruited into the CIA by a graduate school professor at George Washington University, who had been himself a former CIA official. Tell us more about this encounter.
Yeah, I was in graduate school at George Washington University. This is 1988. And I was taking a class called The Psychology of Leadership. It was taught by an eminent psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Gerald Post. He was very unusual in that he had a PhD in political science, a PhD in psychology, and an MD, and was a practicing psychiatrist. So he was teaching this course, absolutely fascinating course, on the psychology that foreign leaders exercise to implement their policies, their foreign policies, and to get what they want. Looking at, for example, why the Yalta Conference near the end of World War II was in Yalta. Why wasn't it, in Washington or London or Tehran or whatever? And it's because that Stalin knew that Roosevelt was sick. And so Roosevelt had to go all the way around the war through Africa and then Iran to go up to Yalta. And by the time he got there, he was exhausted and he wanted to go to sleep. And Stalin insisted that the talks begin immediately. And just to be able to go to bed, Roosevelt gave up Poland. And so, things like that. We don't normally talk about the role of psychology in the execution of foreign policy. So I did really well in this class. And he gave us an assignment one day where he wanted us to shadow our bosses for a week and then write a psychological profile of our bosses. I was working at a labor union at the time, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, at their international headquarters here in Washington. And I was a little afraid of my boss. He was a big, mean union organizer. He had his back broken during a riot by scabs, and he was just a mean, old school badass. And so I'm spending the week with him, and halfway through the week, we get into an argument, and I called him a racist, which he was. He got so angry, he balled up his fists, and I put up my hands to protect myself, thinking, I went too far this time. Here it comes. And he looks at me and he says, "My penis is bigger than yours." And I said, "What?" And he said it again. And I said, "You know what? You're nuts." And I quit. And I walked out. I quit. So I went back to my dorm and I wrote this paper. I told the story in the paper. And I said, he's a sociopath with psychopathic and possibly violent tendencies. And then using the texts, I gave examples of these tendencies. A week later, I get the paper back. I got an A. And in the margin, Dr. Post wrote, "Please see me after class." So class finished and I went to see him. I said, "Dr. Post, you wanted to see me?" He says, "Come to my office." So I go down to his office, a couple of floors below the classroom. And he said, "Look, I'm not really a professor here. I'm a CIA officer undercover as a professor here. And I'm looking for people who might fit into the CIA's culture. I think you would be a good CIA officer. Are you interested in joining the CIA?" And the truth is, I had given it, 5 minutes of thought, just like the Foreign Service or maybe Capitol Hill. But I was getting married in like 6 weeks and I had a job lined up, but it wasn't a career lined up. So I said, sure, I'd be interested in joining the CIA. And he started the process for me. I did all the testing and the background investigations and all that. It took quite a while. It took about 16 months, but I found myself in the CIA.
And this is, by the way, just to follow up on that, Gerald Post also did a biography on bin Laden and al-Qaeda. Is it the same Gerald Post, by the way?
Same Gerald Post. He was extensively published. He was, I used to see him on TV all through my CIA career. And after my CIA career, I'd see him on TV all the time. Discovery Channel, National Geographic, CNN. He must have written 24 books. And they were on, bin Laden and Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi and all these foreign leaders with whom we had difficult relationships. We have this odd default in our country where we just default to the notion that someone that we don't agree with is crazy. Oh, Saddam Hussein? Oh, he's crazy. No, he's not crazy. He's actually quite sane. He runs his country like a mob boss runs his family. But it was incumbent on us at the CIA to understand that, to understand what was going through his mind when he was making these decisions. And then how do we get what we want based on what we think his decision-making process is going to be? So yeah, Post was all about psychology and leadership.
So when you get to the CIA, were you instituted into Middle East religious fundamentalism?
Yeah, my bachelor's degree was in Middle Eastern studies, and I ended up getting hired into the office that Dr. Post had created at the CIA, the Office of Leadership Analysis.
Okay.
So there were several components in leadership analysis. One of them was the political psychology division, which he had also founded, whose job it was just to do long distance psychological profiles on foreign leaders. So it was a perfect fit for me with my Middle East background.
And what year was that, by the way?
1989.
1989. Because in 1996, David Cohen actually helped to create the Bin Laden Issue Station, which was codenamed Alex Station after Michael Scheuer's son, which Scheuer was the chief of station. And one of the co-employees who was the initial hires at Alex Station was one of who was hired at the same time as you, was Alfreda Ann Bukowski. What was your overall assessment prior to Bukowski becoming situated at Alex Station?
I spent the first 7.5 years in the Directorate of Intelligence, first in the Office of Leadership Analysis, and then in the Office of Near Eastern and South Asian Analysis. I went overseas. I went into Arabic training for a year, and then I went overseas to the Middle East for 2 years. Came back working in NISA again on Iraq. And then I got bored, to tell you the truth. It's just Iraq, 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 Iraq. It was clear to me that the Clinton administration was just going to maintain the status quo. And I thought, I could be here for another 20 years working on Iraq and writing the same things. So I decided to do something different, and I switched to counterterrorism operations. Very unusual move. But as it turned out, at the time, I was the only person in the entire CIA who was fluent in both Arabic and Greek. And so I went through all of the operational training mid-career, and then went to Athens as the CTC representative. At the same time, Alfreda began working in Alex Station. So when I got back from Athens, it was the summer of 2000. Let me think. I went back to CTC and I headed a group that did training for Middle Eastern intelligence services to do counterterrorism operations. 9/11 hit. I went to Pakistan to head counterterrorism operations there. And then when I went back, they reassigned me to Alex Station, and I was the chief of counterintelligence there, looking for moles and probes and double agents and stuff like that. And then I went up to the 7th floor.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned this, because I didn't know whether to put it into questioning and whatnot. There wasn't many Arab linguist speakers at CIA, was there?
16.
16.
Mm-hmm.
Out of how many?
The actual number of employees is classified, but it's well into 5 digits.
Into 5. Wow, 16 out of 5 digits. All right, that's a problem. And that was something the FBI later on actually complained about. John O'Neill, the late John O'Neill, head of the counterterrorism unit in New York, basically complained that Ali Soufan was the only Arabic speaker, and that they didn't spend enough funding into getting Arab linguists speakers.
Yeah, the FBI and the CIA had the same problem with this lack of Arabic speakers, and in fact, it was actually worse in the FBI, because they treat linguists in the FBI as second-class citizens. So you can rise up as an FBI agent, up to GS-15, and then you go into the senior executive service. But if you're a translator, most everybody's going to be stuck at the GS-12 level. And then if you go into supervisory position, you get up to 14. Well, here's Ali Soufan, who's interrogating the most important high value target that we had captured up to that point. And this guy's a GS-12 nobody who will never get the respect that an agent will get, even though the agent doesn't speak a single word of Arabic and is unable to participate in these interrogations. That's why Ali left the FBI and opened his own firm. And he's been wildly successful.
Yes, he has. And I think it defies belief, John, to think that during that time when bin Laden and al-Qaeda was getting the attention from the CIA and the FBI, that they wouldn't have hired more Arab linguist speakers. Why do you think that was?
That's a good question, and it's a difficult one to answer. Pre 9/11, they used to say that, the ones that really are fluent, like level 5 educated fluent in Arabic, are Arabs. They're naturalized citizens. And can we trust a naturalized citizen from Syria or Iraq or Egypt or a Palestinian? Like, can they really get cleared 6 levels above top secret and have an SITK gamma clearance? So they tended to keep people like that at arm's length. I'll give you an example. When I went away to Arabic training for that year, 3 CIA employees were my teachers. One was born in Lebanon, a woman, and then there was a man and a woman who were born in Egypt. And they were, full-time CIA employees, but I had a blue badge showing that I was cleared to the SITK gamma level. They had yellow badges, which showed that they were cleared to the secret level. Well, why? We're all working for the CIA. We all go through the same background investigations. We all go through the same polygraph exams. Why am I cleared at 7 or 8 levels higher than they're cleared? And it was because they were not born in the United States. That changed after 9/11. But they did it wrong after 9/11. After 9/11, they went out and sought people like that. But then they ended up hiring like an army, for example, of Lebanese Catholics. Well, Lebanese Catholics hate Muslims. And so their analysis was often skewed. It was unreliable. It's like, well, how do you come to this analytic conclusion? Well, you come to this analytic conclusion because you hate Muslims, right? Or we hired a whole bunch of Iraqi Christians from up north. Well, Iraqi Christians are going to be just as biased. We hire Coptic Egyptians who are also Christians. So they just went about it in this weird way. And then you send these Christians out to secret sites to interrogate al-Qaeda, and they're as cruel as Mitchell and Jessen were. So it was a problem. They realized that they had made a mistake of not hiring Arabic speakers all these years. And then they doubled down on the mistake by hiring the wrong kinds of Arabic speakers after 9/11.
You actually became a counterterrorism operations officer and worked in Athens, Greece on Euro-communist terrorism.
Yes.
And then in 2000, you returned to CIA headquarters. But by June of 2001, the CIA knew something big was about to happen.
Yeah.
Yet in chapter 9 of your book, you had not focused on al-Qaeda prior to this.
No.
However, there seemed to be some interagency infighting between the FBI and CIA at the station regarding information concerning Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. What are your thoughts surrounding that?
Oh, these fights between the CIA and the FBI were epic.
Yeah.
You know, the problem between the two organizations goes back to the creation of the CIA in 1947. This was a close vote in Congress to this. I'm talking about the National Security Act of 1947, which created the National Security Council and the CIA. And the reason why it was a close vote is because J. Edgar Hoover, the longtime director of the FBI, longtime 48.5 years long director of the FBI, he didn't want to see the creation of an intelligence service that focused on foreign intelligence. And so President Truman told Hoover that the CIA would be a division of the FBI. And so Hoover lifted his objection. And it was enough to flip a couple of votes in Congress that the bill passed. And it was only after it passed that Hoover realized he had been tricked and that the CIA was going to be an independent agency. It was not going to be a division of the FBI. And so Hoover ordered his people not to cooperate with this new organization. And, you know, the FBI always thought that they were better than the CIA, and then the CIA thought they were better than the FBI because the CIA's budget was bigger and the CIA didn't have to answer to Congress. And I mean, things just remained bad between them through the 50s, through the 60s and the Vietnam War, even though they did cooperate on some things, through the 70s. I mean, you know, we got to the point where the CIA was looking for a couple of hijackers that we wanted, would-be hijackers that we wanted to recruit, not having the idea, not having the understanding that they were already in the country. And the FBI was surveilling them. Well, the FBI wasn't passing the information on to the CIA. The CIA never passed its information on to the FBI. The CIA knew that they were going to hijack planes, but didn't know where they were. The FBI knew where they were, but didn't know that they were going to hijack planes. And so it was because of this bureaucratic infighting that we even had a 9/11.
Yeah, when I interviewed Anthony Schaefer, he said something similar to what you said. And he said he naively thought that everybody would be on the same page.
Right. So did I.
Right. So did yourself.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so
because we're all one team, right?
Right. Exactly.
I mean, our job was to protect the country. It wasn't to fight with each other to see who gets credit for protecting the country. It was to protect the country. And then, you know, we've got 2,000 Americans dead in one day because we couldn't do our jobs.
What was it, basically just because of the information wall, or was there something more in your estimation?
Yeah, there was something more. This is something that George Tenet and Dick Clark. Dick was the senior advisor to the president for counterterrorism at the NSC. They used to call him the counterterrorism czar. Dick and George were, George's words, shouting from the rooftops that something was going to happen, something terrible. They were going to the White House all the time, talking to Cheney and Condi Rice and, you know, everybody who would listen. And Cheney was the worst of them all in that he was more interested in China and the threat from China than anything else. What, a couple of this handful of illiterate Arabs is a threat to us? Come on. They have no money. They have no weapons. They're in Afghanistan. They can't get here. What threat could they pose to us? And George kept saying, it's not that simple, right? This is a serious threat to us. And Cheney just wouldn't hear it.
When you were with Alex Station at the time, you actually noticed the sheer division between the FBI and the CIA. Was this basically just the bureaucrats, or was it right down to the case officers themselves?
Straight down to the case officers. We were ordered not to cooperate with one another, and it's like nobody even needed to issue the order. We weren't going to cooperate with one another anyway.
Right, and also too, you also had the NSA to deal with, because at the time, the NSA actually was monitoring a house in Yemen, which is owned by Ahmed al-Hada. And meanwhile, they're collecting signals intelligence. The CIA doesn't do signals intelligence; they do, but the NSA is the primary agency for that.
Yeah,
but they weren't sharing information with you guys either. So
no.
I mean, yeah,
it's funny at NSA. I got to be careful what I say here, but you're absolutely right. You know, NSA, they'll intercept something, and it'll be so sensitive, so highly classified that they don't tell anybody. Well, then why bother to intercept it if you're not going to tell anybody?
Right.
You got to tell us. You got to tell the FBI, and you got to tell the NSC. You can't just, you know, show each other at NSA. Look at this incredible piece of intelligence. It's so crazy. We can't share it with anybody. That doesn't help anyone. Right. If you don't share it, you don't disseminate it. I used to get calls from NSA every once in a while. It was crazy. We were all supposed to cooperate, right? We're all working together. So I go over to NSA and spend a day. How you doing? We have lunch. Then they would come over to CIA and we'd take them to the gift store and we'd have lunch and briefings, whatever, because we're all supposed to be on the same team. And then they would call. I'll never forget this. My green phone rings and I answer, and it's NSA. I was like, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" "Good. How are you?" I said, "Yeah, I'm good. What's going on?" "We've got a really hot piece of intelligence." I said, "Okay, about what?" "Well, I can't tell you. I'm just calling to tell you that this is something that you're going to want to find out about, and it's really hot. It's really sensitive." I said, "Well, how the heck am I supposed to know then what it is if you won't tell me?" "Well, we're gonna send a hard copy by courier, and they're gonna put it in a safe in the director's office." I'm like, "Are you friggin' kidding me?" So what we had to do, they would send a copy to the director's office and a copy to the operations center. So I'd have to go up to the operations center and say, "I'm told that there's an intercept in," and then I have to see it. They're like, "Yes, you have to sign the logbook." I have to sign it. I sign my name and the date and the time and the title of the report. And then I'm not allowed to touch it or to take notes on it. So you have to stand there. Like, I would always stand like this. Some people would stand like that. And you read it and then you're like, "Okay, thank you." But you can't touch it. You can't copy it. You can't take notes on it. And because you can't take notes on it, you can't put it in the president's daily brief. Right? Because then the PDB editor is going to say, Well, where's the original copy? We can't just tell the president, here's this information, just take my word for it.
Right.
You got to attach the original. The original copy is, hands off, eyes only. Well, that's no way to run an intelligence community. If you're cleared, you're cleared. So
would that come from the director Hayden himself?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Hayden was trouble from the get-go.
Sure. It's the one agency I've concentrated on in my studies for 9/11, because the NSA had run 2 wiretaps. One was on bin Laden's satellite phone, and the other was the house in Yemen. And I said, if they had any information, it would be them. They would, and according to Scheuer later on, he would later say the NSA was the gold mine for all intelligence regarding that. And I said,
CIA had 0 sources, 0, literally nothing.
Yeah, they're just going by on the ground. But as for signal intelligence, they heard everything. And according to the former senior executive, Thomas Drake, he would later on say that the NSA had so much metadata regarding al-Qaeda and bin Laden that if they shared it with other intelligence, they could have stopped 9/11 themselves, just themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, wow, I can only imagine what was being said on those lines by these al-Qaeda operatives.
Yeah.
And I it leads me to believe that, all this information is basically classified. I don't even know. Yeah, for sure.
And, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but on 9/11 or 9/12, Orrin Hatch, the Republican senator from Utah, was giving an interview on CNN, and he mentioned the fact that NSA was on bin Laden's cell phone, and then bin Laden never used a phone ever again.
Yeah. He stopped in 98. 1998.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, 1998. Yeah, and Washington Post broke a story, and then later on they said that was the reason why. But the reason why he just dislodged the phone was that because you had the East Africa bombings, and the trial came out, and Mohammed Daoud al-Awali actually gave the number to the Yemen hub in that trial, and it was public. And I said, that's astounding that the Yemen hub number was named in the trial, and they still use that number.
Oh my God.
And I can only imagine, but bin Laden ditched the phone in 1998, but that didn't stop him from other al-Qaeda operatives using other satellite phones. So like I said, I can only imagine what the NSA had collected up to that point. It's only led to the imagination.
Yeah.
Because we really don't know.
It's got to be astounding, but we don't know. You're right.
Right, exactly. So listen, after the September 11th attacks, you were actually named chief of the counterterrorism operations in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the biggest story at the time was March 28, 2002.
Yeah.
Faisalabad, Pakistan. And you were behind the raid to capture the biggest name in al-Qaeda at the time, Abu Zubaydah.
That was arguably the most important day of my life.
Was it really? Yeah.
It certainly changed the course of the rest of my life. Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's a very, very long story. So I'll give you the very short version.
Sure. Yeah.
We had intelligence that Abu Zubaydah was somewhere in Pakistan. We tracked him to both Faisalabad and Lahore. He kept going back and forth, back and forth. There's a turnpike, a toll road that connects the 2 cities. But, there are 12 million people in Lahore, and there are 7 million people in Faisalabad, and it's really tough to narrow it down. So we were able to narrow it down to his location down to 14 possible sites, which later became 13 possible sites. We brought a big team in, half FBI, half CIA, and we hit all 13 sites simultaneously. And we're fortunate enough to get him in one.
It was a fierce firefight during it.
It actually wasn't. I told everybody before the raid began, before we kicked off, we actually went our separate ways at 10 p.m. the night before. And I said, listen, there's only one rule here. Our orders are to take him alive. He's got to be taken alive. Mm-hmm. And as soon as the operation started, this one Pakistani policeman just opened fire. And he killed one guy who was with Abu Zubaydah, who was a bomb maker. He almost killed Abu Zubaydah by shooting him in the thigh, the groin, and the stomach with an AK-47. And then he shot Abu Zubaydah's bodyguard. Now, they were unarmed. There was no reason to shoot them like that. But the guy got carried away. Yeah.
He suffered some injuries. Now, that was at the time, that was huge because, and incidentally enough, also, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. You know, it's funny because in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and 9/11, a lot of the co-conspirators behind these two terrorist attacks were captured in Pakistan.
Yes.
Ramzi Youssef, Ramzi bin al-Shibh, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and Abu Zubaydah.
That's right.
What was the ISI? Could they be trusted in these operations? And
the short answer is yes. The long answer is maybe. Yes, in that there really were two ISIs. There was counterterrorism, and then there was everything else, which really means Kashmir and India.
Yeah.
So the counterterrorism guys, to a man, were all trained in England. All of them went to Sandhurst. So these guys were pros down the line. I literally trusted them with my life. Literally.
Is that right?
I did. And they were heroes. But you go to ISI headquarters and you see lots of guys with really long, bushy beards. These are the guys that were, you know, that created the Taliban, that were funneling weapons to the Kashmiris and to the Pakistani terrorist groups, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, the Ansar Allah. I mean, there were countless terrorist groups. You'd get the stink eye from them. They don't respond to Salamu Alaikum. So there were two ISIs. The ones that I worked with were amazing. The other ones, I would fear for my safety around them.
Sure. Another notable terrorist who actually who was a British citizen is Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So, all right, Abu Zubaydah is captured. Did you ever get to talk with Abu Zubaydah? What was he like as a person?
I spent 56 consecutive hours with Abu Zubaydah at his bedside. And my orders came from George Tenet directly. 24/7 CIA eyes on, he said. Do not leave his bedside. And it's the longest I was ever awake in my life. To the point where, you know, it made me sick, nauseous to be up that long. And I was afraid that he was going to try to escape. So I tore up a sheet and I tied him to the bed by his wrists and his ankles so he couldn't move. But he was so severely wounded, he wasn't going anywhere. They were pumping, they had an actual pump to pump blood into him. And as quickly as they could pump the blood in, it was just leaking out. And there was this enormous pool of blood under the bed. He was soaked. The sheets are soaked. We had blood all over us. I mean, it was like a scene out of a horror movie. It really was. So he was in a coma the first 24 hours. And then finally he woke up and he asked me to kill him. It was the first thing that he said when he came out of the coma. First he was delirious and he asked me for a glass of red wine. And then when he got his bearings, he asked me to kill him. He asked me to smother him with a pillow. And I said, no, I said, nobody's going to kill you, Abu Zubaydah. You know, at first when he first motioned for me to come like this next to the bed, I moved his oxygen mask and I said to him, Shu Ismek, what is your name? And he shook his head. So I said it again, Shu Ismek. And he said to me in English, I will not speak to you in God's language. And I said, that's okay, Abu Zubaydah, we know who you are. And then he started crying and he said, please kill me, brother, kill me. Take the pillow and kill me. And I said, nobody's going to kill you. We've been looking for you for a long time. I said, you're going to get the best medical care that the American government can provide. So, I mean, we spent a lot of time together. He cried constantly. He said he would never know the touch of a woman. He would never know the joy of fatherhood. And I said, listen, you're not the victim here. There were 50,000 people in those towers. What did you think we were going to do? Did you think we wouldn't try to hunt you down and hunt bin Laden? And I said, come on. listen, I told him, I'm going to give you some advice. I'm the nicest guy that you're going to meet in this experience. I told him, my colleagues, they're not nice like I am. So if there's one thing you do, it's that you have to cooperate. And he said, you seem like a nice man, but you're the enemy and I'll never cooperate. I said, well, suit yourself. I said, I told him, your life is over. What remains of it can be easy or it can be terrible. It's up to you. He didn't care.
Sure, because afterwards it became very terrible.
Very terrible
for him.
We talked about, we captured his diary when we raided the house, and it was more than a diary. It was he would write poetry in it. He would draw doodles and sketches. He would write these letters to himself as a young man, like he's writing to the 14-year-old Abu Zubaydah, telling him not to make the mistakes that he ended up making. He was extraordinarily bright, very creative. We talked about the differences between Christianity and Islam. We talked about our families, and yeah, it was a surreal experience.
Okay, you actually end up resigning from the CIA in 2004, and you became a terrorism consultant for ABC News in 2008, and you actually stayed pretty active outside from the CIA. And you actually gave an interview to Brian Ross in 2007 describing the capture of Abu Zubaydah. And during this interview, you mentioned that a former CIA employee said to you that Zubaydah had been waterboarded. Now, we do know that the CIA waterboarded him 83 times. What happened after this interview?
Yeah, the whole weight of the U.S. government fell on my head. Is the easiest way of saying what happened. I said three things. I said that the CIA was torturing its prisoners. I said that torture was official U.S. government policy. And I said that the policy had been personally approved by the president. So within 24 hours, the FBI began investigating me for leaking classified information. They investigated me from December of 2007 to December of 2008. And in December of 2008, they sent my attorney a declination letter where they were declining to prosecute me. They said that I had not revealed classified information. So 3 weeks later, Barack Obama was inaugurated as president, and he named John Brennan, the Deputy National Security Advisor for Counterterrorism. John and I went back to my hiring date at the CIA. We never liked each other. And Brennan was one of the creators of the torture program. He was the number 4 at the CIA. He was the deputy executive director. And so he asked the Justice Department to secretly reopen the case against me. I had no idea that for the next 3 years, my phones were tapped, my emails were being intercepted, groups of FBI agents were surveilling me. And then in January of 2012, I was arrested and charged with 5 felonies, including 3 counts of espionage, coming from that ABC News interview and a subsequent interview I did with the New York Times.
You got the similar treatment to your counterparts at the NSA, Thomas Drake,
yes,
Kirk J. Wiebe, and Ed Loomis,
and Bill Binney.
And Bill Binney, that's right. These guys, and they basically just, didn't say anything that was classified, just like you. You didn't share any classified information, but yet the agencies which incidentally enough, it was the same agencies that brought down the hammer of the justice upon you. I can only imagine what you were thinking at the time, because there was nothing that you said that was revealing what we
everybody knew.
Everybody, right, exactly.
Everybody already knew. Human Rights Watch had already issued a report saying the CIA was torturing its prisoners. Amnesty International said CIA is torturing its prisoners. The International Committee of the Red Cross said CIA is torturing its prisoners. So then John Kiriakou goes on TV and says the CIA is torturing its prisoners, and I get 3 espionage charges.
When I read your case a while back, I remember when you actually mentioned that even if you reported torture, it would actually be fruitless because the Congressional Intelligence Committees were already aware of it.
They were all in on it. People ask me all the time, well, you shouldn't have gone to the media. You should have gone through your chain of command. My chain of command created the torture program.
Right.
Oh, you should have gone to the oversight committees. The oversight committees secretly approved and then financed the torture program. So no, I couldn't go through the chain of command, and I couldn't go to the congressional oversight committees. They were in on it.
Was this basically, now Thomas Drake says this, because he went to the media, and Bill Binney says the same thing. Is it because that you were talking to the media? That's the reason why?
No, in fact, I had never spoken to a journalist before in my life. I mean, that's off limits, right? It's out of bounds when you're at the CIA. But Brian Ross had called me and said that he had a source who said that I had tortured Abu Zubaydah. And I said, that was absolutely untrue. I was the only person who was kind to Abu Zubaydah. And he said, well, you're welcome to come on the show and defend yourself. Well, I didn't know that that was an old reporter's trick. And it turned out that he did have a source at the White House who said that I had tortured Abu Zubaydah. And I said to my wife, I figured it out that it was at the White House. And I said, Brian Ross's source is at the White House, and they're going to try to pin this on me. I said, I've got to defend myself. And so I decided I was just going to tell the truth, that whatever he asked me, I'm just going to tell the truth.
What I'd like to get your thoughts on something that has been bothering me for a little bit is that the CIA had actually tortured Ramzi bin al-Shibh, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and the Guantanamo Five, who are connected to the 9/11 attacks. This seemed to be a huge, huge mistake, because even if even by telling the truth, the public and the court system have to now take into account that they could be manufacturing lies, or it could be saying something, because we'll never know the actual truth.
You are correct. You're correct. And I would add to that, even more importantly, let's assume that they did tell the truth, right? Which they didn't. Torture never gets the truth. It gets whatever they think you want to hear just to get you to stop torturing them. But let's say that they did give us something that was actionable. We can't use it in court, and they can never be prosecuted. So we've demeaned ourselves as a country. We're supposed to be this shining beacon of hope for law and order and human rights and civil liberties. And it's all nonsense, because we did exactly what we make other countries promise they won't do. And we ruined whatever cases we might have had against them. And so, last week when Biden was in Saudi Arabia, and he told the Crown Prince, hey, you killed Jamal Khashoggi, and this is a human rights violation, and it's a violation of international law, and blah, blah, blah. And Mohammed bin Salman said, well, let's talk about Abu Ghraib. Let's talk about Guantanamo. And he's right. So we only hurt ourselves with this cockamamie program.
Now, I'd be hard pressed to assume that you know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Wouldn't the CIA have already known that by torture, they're going to create this scenario in the first place?
Sure, but they didn't care. There are a couple of elements at play here. One is the need for revenge. 9/11 was the greatest intelligence failure in American history, and it was preventable. And so there was this desire for revenge to show the American people, we're going to hit them back 10 times harder than they hit us, right? Number one. Secondly, it comes back to that fundamental difference between the CIA and the FBI, where the FBI is constantly trying to build a criminal case. And the CIA doesn't care about any criminal case. They just want to take the bad guy off the street. And if that means that you disappear him, or you send him to Cairo or Damascus or somewhere else, and they disappear him, well, that's life in the fast lane.
When I interviewed Ken Williams of the FBI in Phoenix, I once asked him, I said, do you think there'll ever be a trial? And he said, no.
No, definitely.
And I'll ask you that question.
Absolutely not. There will never be a trial.
What do you think would happen from here on?
Well, they would have to they would have to close whatever courtroom this thing would take place in, because literally everything out of everybody's mouth, the CIA is going to jump up and down and say is classified. But more importantly, I think whatever the defendants would have to say would expose the CIA to its own criminal charges. Listen, it's a felony to classify something for the purpose of keeping it from the public, right? So if you are committing a criminal act like torture, which is against US law, against international law, against the International Convention Against Torture and Inhumane Punishment or Inhumane Treatment, it is illegal to classify that. And the whole thing is classified, the whole program. So this is far more complicated than just, did they do it or did they not do it?
Right, sure.
That's why I don't think there will ever be a trial. You know, Carol Rosenberg at the New York Times.
Oh, yes.
What did I say?
No, Carol Rosenberg at the New York
Yeah.
Times. Yeah.
She's the only person who really writes on this issue. There's a possibility that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Abu Zubaydah, Ramzi bin Ashib, and Abdurrahim Aneshadi might take guilty pleas.
Yes, I've heard this before. Yeah.
Right. And it's the craziest thing in that all they're asking is to not be sent to Florence, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
They want to spend the rest of their lives at Guantanamo because it's tropical, right? You got the ocean right over here. The weather's usually decent. It's hot. But Florence, Colorado, in a 6 by 10 foot concrete cell where you never see the sun again for the rest of your life, they just can't bear the thought.
No.
So she's the only one reporting on it, that these talks are underway, that we might end up with a handful of guilty pleas. But again, coming back to your original question, there's never, ever going to be a trial for any of these guys.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And when I interviewed Ken Williams again, he actually said that the deal actually is that they're going to take the death penalty off the table.
Yes.
But they have to plead guilty to 9/11 altogether.
And the truth is, we could never sentence them to death anyway. You know?
Is that right? Is that right? Right.
Oh yeah, they haven't been tried. No court has levied a death penalty against them.
Right. Is it? I mean, to me, it's such a paradox because their evidence can't be used against them, and I think the government knows that unless they're willing to declassify classified information, which I think, like with you, I agree with you, they're not going to do that. But they would. That's the reason why the trial hasn't started in 20 somewhat years. So initially, now I heard 2024. Well, I think what they're hoping is that they just die in prison.
Yeah.
And that.
Well, you remember seeing in the Senate torture report what little of it we were able to see, that the plan for Abu Zubaydah, and we would have to assume that this was the plan for the others too, was they just wait until he dies and then they cremate him and throw his ashes in the ocean.
When you know, incidentally enough, you bring this up with Abu Zubaydah. I read in the Senate torture report as well, which I'm posting on Twitter from time to time, excerpts of it, that when the CIA got hold of Zubaydah, they actually put him in a coffin-like prison for 24 hours. They put beetles and bugs in there, whatnot, and
it was longer than 24 hours.
Was it longer?
Yeah, they kept him in there for 2 weeks. They would just open the coffin up long enough to change his diaper and throw some food in.
Oh, is that 2 weeks? Okay, I mistakenly thought it was 24 hours. And I heard that they took out the concrete of his cell, put in wood for walls so they could wall him and whatnot. And I said, what these some of these torture devices even didn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the excerpts are like, you know, Bruce Jesson and Ivins basically defended themselves, saying that we were trying to protect the country by getting information from them.
Yeah, they keep repeating that, hoping that maybe someday they'll convince themselves.
Right, I think that's exactly.
You know, let me interrupt you for 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
You talk about Mitchell and Jesson, you talk about George Tenet and Steve Kappas and Jose Rodriguez and Gina Haspel and all these people. The reason they keep, and John Brennan, the reason they keep repeating this lie over and over and over again, that this was the right thing to do, is the patriotic thing to do, is because they know that this is their legacy. The other 30 years of their career doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And when they die and their obituaries are written, this is what it's going to say: that they were responsible for torturing other human beings, in some cases to death. And so they're trying, in whatever time they have left on this planet, to convince the American people that this was the right thing to do. And it wasn't.
After you get sent to prison, you had a lot of people speaking up for you. And one of them was Bruce Riedel, who I'm very familiar with. Yeah. And he tried to commute your sentence before Barack Obama.
Yes.
You end up being released on February 3rd, 2015. And incredulity abound. You even remarked immediately that you would end up doing this all over again to expose the crimes of torture, and that this was never about leaking classified information. Never. You still stand by that statement?
100%. 100%. In fact, I gave an interview to the BBC back then too. It's their version of 60 Minutes. It's kind of a famous show because the presenter attacks. It's constantly attacking, right? And he finally said, well, you don't seem to be too upset by any of this. And I said, well, it's water under the bridge. It doesn't help me in any way to focus on the events of the past. And I said, if Martin Luther King can forgive the people who wronged him, and Nelson Mandela can forgive the people who sent him to solitary confinement for 20 plus years, I can certainly forgive people who wronged me and sent me away for only 23 short months. And he said, I don't believe that for a second. And I said, but it's the truth. And he asked me if I had any regrets, and without missing a single second, I said, absolutely not. And I said, listen, I know I'm going to take a lot of heat for saying this, but I have zero remorse for what I did. This was the right thing to do. I said, I'm a patriot. I'm a patriot. And I hate to think that on the day that I put my right hand up in the air and I swore an oath to protect and uphold the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I was the only person in the room that day who actually meant it. So I said, no, I would definitely do it again.
What are you hoping now, John? You wrote a couple of books, been author behind a couple of books here. What do you want to do from this point forward for the future?
In my life, you mean?
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot of different things right now. It's funny. I still feel like I'm 20 years old, but I'm not. I'm going to be 58 in a couple of weeks. And for the first time in a very long time, I'm happy and I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I've got a radio show every day here in Washington from 12 to 2, terrestrial radio. I've got 3 columns. I write for Consortium News, the Sheer Post at USC, and Covert Action Magazine. I just sent in the manuscript for my 8th book, and I'm 61 pages into my 9th book now. So I enjoy writing books. And in the next couple of months, I'm going to start doing some lobbying. I've got a master's degree in legislative affairs that I never really used outside the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So, in an experience like this, you really get to see who your real friends are.
Sure. And
who they're not. And in some cases, you might even be married to them. And I think I finally figured it out after 58 years.
The last question for you, I just want to get your opinion. The latest conflict in Ukraine, actually, we spent billions of dollars in military aid. Are we making a similar mistake as what we saw in 1979 Afghanistan?
I think so. Yes. I've taken kind of an unpopular position on this war, unpopular with both sides. because I'm opposed to the Russian invasion, and I'm also opposed to this unlimited aid to Ukraine. I would oppose the war no matter who the parties were. If the United States had invaded Ukraine, I would oppose that. Let the diplomats do their jobs. At the same time, you know, we've got bridges falling into the rivers below them. We've got highways that are international embarrassments. We've got third-rate schools and second-rate hospitals. You travel and you see the airports in some of these other countries where we should be embarrassed by our airports. We should be embarrassed by the condition of our schools, but we seem to have unlimited funds for weapons and weapon systems and aid to Ukraine. Let's spend the money here in the United States. We have a larger defense budget than the next 8 largest countries combined. Do we really need that? I don't think so.
Just to follow up on that too, it seems that we're getting pressured from our foreign lobby institutes of the Gulf and Israel to engage a war with Iran.
Yes.
And you know, I've tried to speak as unbiased as I can, report as honestly as I can regarding this very tumultuous situation. What would be your opinion about a potential conflict with Iran? Is that even possible at this point? Yeah.
Oh, it's definitely possible. And I'll tell you, we came very close to attacking Iran in the final weeks of the George W. Bush administration. Benjamin Netanyahu has dedicated his life to dragging the United States into a war with Iran. Bush thought the better of it, and then Obama wasn't even vaguely interested in attacking Iran. Now I fear that Joe Biden is doing the Israelis' bidding again. There were 2 reasons to go to Saudi Arabia. One, obviously, was to ask them to increase oil production, but the other was to ask them to participate in this regional defense idea that the Israelis have come up with. So far, it's Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates. The Israelis asked us if we would try to draw in the Saudis and the Iraqis. Why? What good does this do for the United States? We have to stop doing the Israelis' bidding, right? Again, let the diplomats do their job. We should have jumped back into the JCPOA, and we should have told the Israelis, we will not fight the Iranians for you. There's no reason to do it. We get nothing out of it as a country. And can you imagine what it would do to the global economy if we went to war with Iran? So we've got to stand up to the Israelis. Enough is enough.
John Kiriakou, former case officer, whistleblower against the program of torture, and author of The Reluctant Spy, My Secret Life in the CIA's War on Terror. Thank you very much for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.